Welcome to week 3 of our class, Transmission of the Light, fall of 2022. My name is Aya Dhammadipa, also known as Reverend Conan Gardanas, and I want to speak today about Prajnatara. Prajnatara is the first of 4 ancestors that we're going to be speaking about this 3rd week of the course. And so again, we've skipped over a few in between Kanadeva and Prajnatara. And the first thing I want to say is that in the Japanese Zen tradition, Prajnatara was understood to be a male. It was understood that all of the ancestors in the lineage who counted were male. And then at some point, it became apparent that that was not the understanding of other Buddhist schools, that in fact, there were records in the Korean Zen tradition and in the Indian tradition that recorded Prajnatara as a woman. And so I'm going to refer to her as her. And in fact, I gave you an article, a link to an article about that, about some of the scholarship around this question. And we'll see a little bit more about what some of the clues might be here. And certainly we don't know for certain one way or the other. So I suppose you can decide for yourself what you think. So Punyamitra has this conversation with Prajnatara as a child. So this is happening in India. And again, there's quite a bit of magical happenings here with Punyamitra. There are some, again, we're still in the Indian context here. There's some resistance by other ascetic Brahmin teachers, Hindu teachers, who had become aware of the fact that Punyamitra was approaching. And there's this very interesting contrast. Punyamitra's cloud or vapor that is the clue that lets them know that he's coming is white. And in response, they put up a black cloud or a black vapor shroud around the palace. And Punyamitra, being the powerful practitioner that he is, says, oh, this will be just a little difficulty. No big deal. And he goes straight to the king, which is a very interesting approach, but turns out that that becomes more common later on. But in Indian Buddhism, that would have been considered an interesting approach most of the time. The monastics were advised to stay away from kings. And then they have this very interesting conversation. So again, we haven't even started talking about Prajnatara yet. This is Prajnatara's teacher, Punyamitra, having a conversation with a king in a particular part of India. And so the king says, what did you come here for? And Punyamitra responds by saying, I came to liberate sentient beings, the only real reason to travel. And then the king asks, by what method do you liberate them? And Punyamitra responds, I liberate each according to kind. So I'm looking here at the Cleary translation. I liberate each according to their kind. Or let's see, the Cook translation is actually lovely here. And I liberate each according with his, I would say their type. A beautiful statement. Right? I don't come trying to make you all fit one particular mold. I come here to encounter who you are, what you are, and show you that the Dhamma applies to you as well. The specifics of each being are met by these teachings. So it's in that context that Punyamitra makes this, there's again some magic, some magical resistance, and some magic that's performed by him. And so he demonstrates his powers and says to the king, he preaches the essentials of the Dharma to the king, and also said at some point, presumably not during this first encounter, there is a wise person in this kingdom who will succeed me. So he makes a prediction. He is aware of the presence of some other being that will become a great Dhamma teacher. And so at that time, there was a Brahmin youth of about 20 years old who had lost their parents and didn't know their name. And they called themselves Kayura. So people called her the young man Kayura. So we don't know really about the gender, but again, there is some information that would lead us strongly to believe that she was a woman, but that, like her name, her identity around that, around the way she came into the world and around family, her early childhood, etc., was not so clear, not so rigid. So then we find this encounter with Kayura, who later becomes Prajnatara, with the Venerable Punyamita. And that is the encounter that's told. Do you remember the past? And Kayura says yes. She says yes, she remembers a past in which she practiced with this same master. And it's by that recognition, some memory, that Punyamita recognizes her. And refers to her as the Bodhisattva Mahastamprapta. We have a note about that from Cook. One who has achieved great power, one of the more prominent bodhisattvas in the pantheon. So again, a very high praise of this being who would later become known as Prajnatara, and some reference to her spiritual power. Whether he means literally that this is the reincarnation of the Bodhisattva, we don't know. Following this wise one, there will be two men, one who will teach in southern India and one who will find the conditions for teaching in China. And then finally, as a result of past causes, the ripening of Kama, this is the way that Keizan is speaking about the ripening of Kayura's Kama, karma. Finally, he named Kayura Prajnatara. And then we have the commentary on that. So with regard to the teacher's transmission, because they were not ignorant of the original way, they were also eternally perfect Tathagatas. So he could mean that again, literally, meaning they are Buddhas who return again and again in the Bodhisattva understanding of how Buddhas behave. Or it could also mean because all things are complete or are connected, or because of this sense of the complete integration, non-separation of all things across time and across space, then they are one with the Tathagatas, as we all are, according to Zen. And we are just trying to realize that, trying to have a lived experience of that. So I would suggest it's probably the latter of those two interpretations, rather than a literal interpretation of a Buddha reincarnating. That certainly is part of certain aspects of Mahayana Buddhism, but I don't think that that was a strong aspect of Keizan's teaching. Then he says at the top of page 145 of the Cook translation, if for one moment they reversed their minds and unveiled their original merits, not even a hair was lacking. So you hear maybe a slight echo of Dogen here, right? Dogen says, take the backward step and turn the light inward. This is what he's talking about in reversing one's mind, turning the mind around to observe itself rather than being focused outwardly, to turn and unveil one's original merits. I don't know what he means by this, original merits. Not even a hair was lacking, which we have been seeing all along, this teaching of the completion, which is necessarily implied by non-separation. To see today is to see eternity. If you look back at eternity, you observe today across time, past, present, and future. They are born with you and they abide with me. There's not a hair of separation because we also are non-separate. Therefore, it is said that Dharma succession transcends the three times of past, present, and future, and realization and experience pervade past and present. Realization and experience pervade past and present. So when we realize our natural non-separation, our natural sense of being awake to non-separation, when we drop the delusions that reinforce some gap, which is not actually there, then we will pervade the past and the present. We will thoroughly understand the karmic mechanisms that are at play, the role of emptiness and interdependence, which is at play in all things as they have come to be. So here we see in this next paragraph that begins in this story, also hop down a bit, and it says sentient beings are Buddha nature, and Buddha nature is sentient beings. So this is Keizan really echoing Dogen's teaching. Dogen, there was often talk in Dogen's time of sentient beings having Buddha nature, and Dogen made clear his sentiment that sentient beings are Buddha nature. We don't possess this thing, because that would mean that there's some part of us which is not that thing, which is doing the possessing, but rather we are the thing itself, fully, in all aspects. So then we see something about the name. The master was named he who brought across Prajna. Now, again, I'm reading from the Cook. From another life, this is the master Prajnatara. He who brought across wisdom from another life, in the same manner that the earlier Bhashashita was so named because of causes in the past. So that's one interpretation. That's taking the word Tara as meaning bringing across. So Prajna is wisdom, and Natara would be the bringing across. But I much prefer Cleary's interpretation of this, because again, I think that there is a clue here about the nature of Prajnatara's embodied experience. And Cleary says, because of the past cause, he named the youth, Punyamitra named the youth Prajnatara, pearl of wisdom. Tara, with a long A. Prajnatara. So Tara means pearl. And pearl of wisdom sounds very much to me more like a woman's Dharma name. So again, that could just be my particular set of conditioning, or it could be some hint that we have about this person of the past. Then again, we see a little bit further down, so continuing with the Cleary, now that I've changed. Even if you seem to be a beginner, this is a very encouraging statement that he makes here. Even if you seem to be a beginner, if in a single moment the mind is turned around to reveal its originally inherent qualities, nothing is lacking at all. Together with the realized ones, you will commune with the Buddhas. So again, echoes of Dogen. And again, this exhortation to turn our investigation to the mind itself and see that non-separation between mind and all things. Even if you seem to be a beginner. So this is a very critical aspect of Zen teaching, which is this idea that because Buddha nature is present at all times, because we are the complete manifestation of non-separation, in any given moment, we can realize that. It is not a question of cultivation or development. It is merely a question of looking well, seeing clearly. So much of this is about the transcendence of time. He goes on to say, succession to the reality of Buddhism transcends time. That realization continuously pervades time. And the way to understand that, the reason why time is so important, again, we've touched on this before, but we'll touch on it again now, that when seen from the totality of all things in its constant state of transformation, underpinned by nirvana, then there is no distinction. We tell time by distinctions, but it cannot be compared in that way if it is a non-separate, completely integrated, holistic view. So this is one way of interpreting what we mean when we talk about the timelessness of the Dhamma. The Dhamma is not constrained by culture, by place, by an individual's body, lifetime, etc. And then again, Kazan, always very encouraging. He says, the teacher does not introduce anything from outside, and the student does not bring anything out from inside. So it's not a question about receiving the magic decoder ring. And it's not a question of spitting out the right answer. Past and present cannot be separated. How can emptiness and existence be different? So again, an emptiness means the lack of independence, the lack of eternal, essential essence. It means conditionality. It means that all things are merely temporal phenomena present because of the conditionality of because of the presence of the conditions that are necessary for them, beings, things, to be here, times, etc. So then if looked at that way, each instant, each minute portion of a second, microsecond, I think that's what it's called, is a unique state of all things. It's a unique state of being. If we were to take a slice view, for example, that is how we tell time. We look at one slice and compare it to another slice. We notice some difference, some change. And we call that a certain number of hours or days or millennia. So the past and the present is not discerned if there is no comparison, if we are looking, observing from the state of integration, full non-separation. And similarly, existence is only understood in the sense of this momentariness, dependent on emptiness, dependent on the arising presence and cessation of causes and conditions. Then he finishes up by giving us a very stern admonition, however. He says, even if you understand that there is no duality, you are still carrying a one-sided view. When you examine and evaluate carefully, when a white heron stands in the snow and they are not the same color, and white flowers and moonlight are not like each other, then you will have seen correctly. That is the implication of this sentence. So that the white heron stands in the snow, that is a poem called The Harmony of Difference and Equality in English. And it is a very famous Zen poem. And it is, again, it's saying that right in the midst of this world of non-separation, where phenomena cannot be distinguished, time cannot be distinguished, separation is not distinguished, right in the midst of that, there are these particular expressions. There are unique human beings, there are bowls and plants and candles and Buddha statues and Buddha beings and so on. There are all of these particularities. We cannot, it is to fall into the view that only non-separation matters is also mistaken. Also mistaken, because we must respond to the world of particularity. We must respond to the world of distinction as we find it. This is why Punyamitra says, I liberate each one according to their kind. Because Punyamitra has seen the non-separation and knows that that expression in each one is unique. And it is only by meeting that uniqueness of expression that the Dhamma will actually be revealed. So he closes, Keizan Zenji closes with this lovely, lovely poem. The light of the moon reflected in the depths of the pond is bright in the sky. So the moon represents wisdom. The light of wisdom is reflected in the depths of the pond. And so ponds are, again, like small, these are individuals, small things holding this water. We'll talk about the water in just an instant, but is bright in the sky. The light of wisdom is bright and reaching everywhere. In the sky, in the depths of the water, is unobstructed. The water flowing to the horizon is thoroughly clear and pure. Again, I'm looking at the Cleary version. Flowing to the horizon is thoroughly clear and pure. So what is this? This water is the nourishing Dhamma. Nourishment of the Dhamma, right? We speak oftentimes about the Dharma rain falls on everyone equally. Or the ocean of wisdom. So water as a metaphor also for Dhamma, for wisdom, is very common. So it can represent our individual. The pond could represent an individual's wisdom. You see that? Imbued with this absolute, ultimate, beautiful light of the moon wisdom. So again, this is the subtle play of the contrast between the absolute and the relative, all completely non-separate, all completely manifesting each other. So the water is thoroughly clear and pure. Sifting and straining over and over, even if you know it exists, boundless and clear, it turns out to be utterly ineffable. Lovely. And let's see, Cook's translation of this poem is also quite beautiful, and I think one that we can relate to. Let me see far. Oh, here we are. So he begins, moonlight reflected in the bottom of the pond. I like Clary's version of the first line, is bright in the sky. The water reaching to the sky is totally clear and pure. Though you scoop it up repeatedly and try to know it, vast, clarifying all, it remains unknown. So what does that mean? It doesn't mean that we cannot realize the Dhamma or that it's not necessary to realize the Dhamma. I think that would be a very mistaken interpretation. What it means is that the one of conceptualizing the individual sense of an observer, the individual sense of knowing, of knowledge, is gone in that moment of the realization of non-separation. There's no you there. You have dissolved into the whole. Then you can reflect back on that. But the knowing of non-separation is not something that has anything to do with our cognitive experience. It's not like that. That's why it's ineffable or inconceivable. We won't be conceiving of it. It's just experienced, fully realized. Fully realized.